Hello again, sweet darlings. I will admit to you that later on in this video, although I am wearing the same clothes, it was a different day that I filmed making this apple crumble because it is one of my husband's favorite recipes. So I probably make it about 2 or 3 times a week, and it depends on the day. Sometimes it's just an apple crumble kind of day, and if you have a husband who has a sweet tooth or has a favorite dessert recipe, you will empathize with me there, that sometimes you just need your favorite dessert. But I wanted to come on and speak to you a little bit about feasting with Saint Felicitas and Perpetua for the 7th of March. This is the recipe that I've chosen for their feast day. And before kind of delving into this world of Catholic saints and celebrating them through food and liturgical living, I had never heard of these two incredible women. I think that we have a lot to learn from them in terms of their faith in God and also how they loved each other through a very difficult time and were true friends to one another. So let me tell you a little bit about them, and then we will jump into our apple crumble recipe video. So who were they? Perpetua was a young noblewoman from Carthage, which is modern-day Tunisia. She was in her early 20s, married, and had an infant son at the time of her martyrdom. Perpetua came from a wealthy and well-educated family and was a recent convert to Christianity. But her decision to follow her faith put her in direct conflict with Roman authorities, who saw Christians as a threat to their rule. Despite her high status, she was thrown into prison with other prisoners. Perpetua's diary, known as the Passion of Perpetua and Felicitas, is one of the most important and vivid accounts that we have from early Christianity. It recounts her dreams, conversations with her father, who begged her to give up her faith, and her unwavering commitment to that faith. When her father came to see her while she was imprisoned, pleading for her to recant her Christian faith in order to save her life, Perpetua responded thus: "Do you see this vase, or water pot, for example? Can it be called by any other name than that what it is? The same way I cannot be called anything other than what I am, a Christian." I love that quote. There's so many great quotes from her diary, so I would highly recommend that if you haven't heard of her before or you haven't read some of those writings before, do look up The Passion of Perpetua and Felicitas. But who was Felicitas? She was actually a slave woman, so two women, totally different upbringings, one wealthy, one a slave, both who had children and both imprisoned for being Christians. So Felicitas was possibly in her 30s, and she'd had several children. She was a devout Christian and was arrested along with Perpetua. She was imprisoned for her faith and faced a particularly cruel fate, as she was pregnant at the time of her arrest. As a result, she was not executed immediately, but was shortly after her due date, when she gave birth to a child, she was brought to trial. She is remembered for her bravery and her faith, and she is said to have comforted Perpetua in prison, urging her to stay strong and reminding her that they would soon be together in heaven. Felicitas, along with Perpetua and their companions, was sentenced to death by being thrown into the arena to be killed by wild beasts. But according to some accounts, she died courageously, her faith unshaken. Now, I've obviously just included a brief, summary of their history, of their story, but I think even that gives you enough to see how incredible these women were. As I said, I would highly recommend you go and look at those original sources and read a little bit more of Perpetua's journal, which obviously talks about Felicitas. But when I've been thinking about this, I've just been thinking about how amazing it is in our life, regardless really of where we are on our journey of faith, to have women alongside us who encourage us. And I have thought that for a long time, not just in terms of faith, but in terms of our vocation, like as mothers, as wives. It makes all the difference if you have just one person by your side, maybe in person or even online, at a stretch, if that's where you make connection, who is encouraging you to stay strong and keep fighting the good fight and do the hard things. I know that, from my background, often there's a lot of talk these days in society about, you have to pursue your own happiness, you have to look after yourself as number one, you need to prioritize your dreams, and to an extent that all sounds good, but I think it misses the point of life, which is loving others, serving others, being a good friend. And when we don't have those things, when we don't have a good friend, or we don't have someone kind of encouraging us, pushing us to do better, I think life is actually, more difficult, regardless of how much we pursue our own happiness. that doesn't actually make us happy. I think what makes us happy is when we are serving others, looking after others, and putting them first, putting the Word of God and His will first in our life. Absolutely. And that's not easy. You know, it's not an easy thing to do. So just having a woman in your life who encourages you, if you have that, don't take it for granted. And even if it's sometimes hard to hear what she has to say, and I've been in that situation where someone has said to me like, you messed up there, or you really hurt my feelings, or I didn't like the way that you said that, or I think that actually the way that you did that or acted was a little bit inappropriate, or it's not quite you, or I know it's not the kind of woman you're trying to be. That criticism, that feedback can be hard to hear, but it's, you know, hopefully coming from a place of love. So do appreciate those women in your life who stand beside you during those tricky times, those times when you're imperfect, when you're faltering in your faith or your marriage or your motherhood, and who encourage you to have faith and to be strong and kind of keep putting one foot in front of the other. So that was really my thought for today. Just there's so much potential in female friendships and women encouraging each other, and I know people bang on about that a lot, but I really, you know, believe that to be true, and that's what stood out for me from this story. So without further ado, let's jump into making a delicious apple crumble to celebrate these two wonderful women, and then we'll end the video a little bit later with a bit more information about them and feasting with the saints. Okay, so for this recipe you need 4 medium red apples peeled and chopped. I am cheating here because a kindly neighbor gave us loads and loads of apples last summer, which I chopped ahead of time and froze, and I froze them in these bags so that I could literally just tip the bag into a dish. It's the perfect amount for an apple crumble, and I make it so often that this has been a massive time saver. You also need 2 tablespoons of granulated sugar, half a teaspoon of ground cinnamon, and 1¼ tablespoons of all-purpose flour. For the topping, again, you need half a cup of all-purpose flour, 4½ tablespoons of butter, which is cold and cubed, which is what I'm doing here, putting it into the bowl and mixing it up, half a cup and 1 tablespoon of brown sugar, and half a teaspoon of ground cinnamon again. Now, I am a little bit of a lazy cook, so usually what I do is I put all of these ingredients into one bowl other than the apples, and I do like to mix and match my spices a little bit. Sometimes I add a bit of ground ginger. I found that ground nutmeg adds some lovely warmth to the recipe as well. And you know what, when I've been out of butter, I have tried this recipe with just lard or shortening at the top. It's not the best, to be honest, if you just use full lard, but I have found that if you just add a little bit of lard in, save yourself some butter, you can get away with it. So as you can see here, I've added my spices and my sugar and my flour and butter into one bowl all at once, and then I'm going to mix it up so that it's a breadcrumb-like consistency for the topping. Now, this ingredient isn't technically in the recipe that I've shared with you all, but I have found that adding some walnuts to the top of a crumble, whether it's an apple crumble or a rhubarb crumble or some other type of crumble that you like to make, this really takes the topping to the next level. It gives a lovely warm crunch. This is especially nice in the winter months or if it's a cold day. And I had bought walnuts already for a salad that I'm going to make later on this week, so I had some spare, so I just threw those in for a nice little extra something, and it makes the crumble topping just feel that little bit more substantial as well. Then I mixed it all up, just making sure that those walnuts were kind of evenly dispersed in the topping, and all that I did then was just pour the whole thing over top of my apples. Because I had them frozen, what I do is I let them kind of warm up in a warm oven and then break them apart with a spatula usually, and then just pour the topping over top and slide it back into the oven for about 25 minutes in my oven, which runs a little bit hot, and that gave me time to kind of set the table, make things cozy, and then I served this apple crumble with some double cream. You could also serve it with ice cream if you prefer, or just have it by itself. It depends on what you like. The favorite in our house is actually peanut butter ice cream, which goes really well with apples, and one of my favorite cookie recipes is actually an apple and peanut butter cookie. So we're quite a peanut buttery household, I suppose, but this was a lovely, easy recipe to put together. It's such a nice dessert, and you can whip it up quite spontaneously if you've got some apples, flour and butter and sugar, which usually are things that we have on hand. And I actually treated myself this time because my husband was kindly looking after our babies while I filmed this and giving them a bath, so I taste tested this and made sure that it was all okay, which it was. And then my toddler had some too with my husband while we read some stories and prayed the rosary before bedtime. Okay, so hopefully now you've seen just how easy that is. I like to make different variations of this recipe. Sometimes I have walnuts to add on top, sometimes I don't, sometimes I use brown sugar. And definitely a tip that I've learned is, when you've got like fresh apples or maybe kind of cooking apples that are a little bit tart, they're not so sweet, just adding a little bit more ginger to your spice mix really brings that flavor alive, or even drizzling some lemon juice over the apples before you then put the topping on. I really love that kind of that fresh flavor is so nice. On the flip side, when it's kind of more wintertime, I definitely add more spice, so I do add a little bit more ground cinnamon, and I also like to add sometimes mixed spice, which really like gives it that depth of flavor. It really kind of makes it feel kind of like so warm and fall autumny flavors. It's not my husband's favorite, I have to admit. It's definitely me that likes that kind of warm spice a little bit more, but it's definitely a comfort thing sometimes, those warm flavors. But yeah, I really hope that you enjoy making this recipe later this week, and that you've been enjoying feasting with the saints, learning about amazing saints throughout history so far. And we're only on day 7 of the month, so we've got a lot more people to learn about and explore and make wonderful recipes as we read about them. I will be back next week to make another recipe. Next week it's going to be a salad, a little bit something different for me, but lovely and fresh for spring. So I look forward to seeing you on that one. But in the meantime, take good care, everyone, and God bless.